Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Epic Comic Book Wednesdays. This is a collaboration between Michael K. Vaughan and myself, where we combine the forces of stately Vaughan Manor and Hyde Cottage to examine the comic books and the comic book characters on which we have wasted our lives. and because this was originally a project on Michael's channel and I horned my way in, he is the one who decides what we will read and talk about every Wednesday. And he decided a long time ago, I knew this day was coming, he decided a while ago that he would coincide our Epic Comic Book Wednesdays with another great BookTube event where we are both co-hosts. And that is Garb August, the event that ruled August from the trash yard, created by Criminali, designed to celebrate garbage for the month of August. And as Michael somewhat gleefully pointed out to me back in July, August had 5 Wednesdays. So he's, despite a little break that he and I both took, about which we will not speak, he has taken the opportunity to load our Epic Comic Book Wednesdays for August with garbage. And he has saved the worst for last. Today is the last day of August. This is the last, I hope, garbage piece of comic books that we look at for a while. There's, God knows, plenty of great stuff that we could talk about. But today we're talking about a character created by Roy Thomas, who, in my opinion, is one of the greatest comic book writers of all time. And this just proves that even a great comic book writer can have a bad day. Roy Thomas was casting around to make a villain for Spider-Man. And he came up with a world-famous scientist, a blood theorem scientist called Michael Morbius, who contracts a rare and deadly blood disease and works feverishly to find a cure. One that ends up involving the blood, presumably mutated blood of vampire bats. I want to point out, on behalf of vampire bats everywhere, that that's not how they work. There are whole books written on vampire bats. You can learn about them, but they've got the word right there in their title. So Morbius comes up with this serum, and he injects himself, and it turns him into what Roy Thomas referred to as a living vampire. So this is not a supernatural creature. Michael Morbius never, in fact, died. He is not pathologically allergic to sunlight. Staking him in the heart won't kill him any more than it will kill anyone else, or any less. He can't, at first anyway, shapeshift into mist or command animals. He does have a limited amount of ability to hypnotize people for no apparent reason. No reason. Nothing even remotely connected with the experiment that he conducts on himself would cause that. Really, it's just that Roy Thomas wanted to have a vampire as a recurring Spider-Man villain. And couldn't quite do it. There were politics at the time. He couldn't quite do it. But he wanted something close to that. So Michael Morbius becomes Morbius the living vampire, who is periodically seized with bloodlust that forces him to kill other humans and drink their blood. And it's doing that allows him to survive. Food won't keep him alive anymore. He needs to drain the blood of a living being. He needs to feed on that blood. And then he wakes up from these killing fevers and feels remorse for what he's done. That doesn't stay true very long. It quickly reverts to the normal vampire curse, which is that you know what you have to do. You're not absolved of it by being lost in a haze of fury or bloodlust. You know what you have to do, and you do it anyway. Eventually that becomes true for Michael Morbius too, and he starts killing people along the Anne Rice line of vampires, which, much as I love her, much as I love her son, much as I love the world that she created, one of the most iniquitous things that she came up with was the idea that a so-called good vampire could stay good if they kill and drain the blood of bad people. That is such a Reagan-era thing to think. And it took off. It is now standard. Buffy the Vampire Slayer made a slight improvement when they wanted to introduce a sympathetic vampire in the form of Angel, by having him haunt blood banks and just get his blood cold from blood banks. That's not all that much better. You're not killing anyone directly, but that's going to cause a blood shortage. And Anyway, at the beginning, Roy Thomas has Morbius the living vampire kill and drain people of their blood in savage hunger lusts. over which Michael Morbius has no control. And the reason why Roy Thomas did that is because the first and most telling objection to a character who has transformed himself into someone who needs to kill innocent people and drink their blood in order to live would be for that character to kill himself. That is the most obvious answer. At one point, very early on in the Morbius storyline, still in Spider-Man, he tries to kill himself and fails, but he could keep trying. he could keep trying. He tries to drown himself, and that doesn't work. But putting on an overcoat and a slouch hat so that no one is afraid of your appearance, and taking the elevator all the way to the top of the Empire State Building, or the Chrysler Building, or the top of the torch of the Statue of Liberty, and hopping off, that would kill you. Take my word for it. That would kill you. But he doesn't do that. And two things. The character is ridiculous. In terms of super beings, he's incredibly weak. He can lift 2 tons. He's not invulnerable. He can be hurt. He can be knocked unconscious. He regenerates. He heals quickly, but not super quickly. He becomes, slightly more powerful in comic book terms. Slightly more powerful, with a weird costume, a weird single leotard costume. And I don't think that Morbius, when he was originally created, could fly. I think he could mainly glide, to be a little bit mysterious. There were 2 ways to make this character work. 2 things that Marvel could have done. I'm sure that both ideas crossed Roy Thomas's mind. One is to keep him a Spider-Man villain. So this is a guy who is periodically driven out of his mind by his own self-induced medical condition, and therefore when Morbius goes on a rampage, Spider-Man has to stop him. That pattern works. In Spider-Man already, we have the Lizard. That already works. If he had stayed a Spider-Man villain, okay, that'd be fine. So once a year, whoever's writing Spider-Man does a Morbius story. Okay, that would be fine. That's one way. Other way would be for him to make a guest appearance in Roy Thomas and Gene Colan doing Tomb of Dracula. Be scorned by Dracula, who's the king of vampires and is a real vampire, not some laboratory mistake. In the Gene Colan era of Tomb of Dracula, Dracula is being stalked all the time by a great character called Blade, who turns out is a half-vampire himself and is hunting vampires, intentionally seeking them out and hunting them. He's at least he becomes, as the character grows and is added by other authors, he becomes stronger, hardier than a normal human being, and more tuned to what vampires do and think, and so more of a lethal enemy to them. He is also the subject, the star, of a number of very early Marvel Cinematic Universe movies that are terrific. Blade became a fan favorite in Tomb of Dracula. Fans loved him. They loved how no-nonsense he was. They loved how he wasn't. He was a black man, but he wasn't some, at least most of the time, he wasn't some dumb knockoff. He seemed to have 3-dimensionality of his own. And another perfect way to deal with the character of Morbius the Living Vampire would have been for him to have a guest starring role in Tomb of Dracula. Dracula is occupied elsewhere, bragging about himself, or whatever he usually did in that series. And instead, the main action for a couple of issues is Morbius being stalked by Blade, who finally corners him and maybe wounds him with a stake or a gun or something like that. And Michael Morbius looks at Blade and says, "You don't understand, you fool. I'm not a real vampire." At which point, Blade, in a black and white, non-comics code authorized magazine, cuts his head off, looks at the camera, Gene Colan artwork, big atmospheric panel, and says, "Close enough," and then the word MFer. Where he cuts Morbius's head off, turns to the camera, so to speak, and says, "Close enough, MFer." That would not only have been a great end to the Morbius Living Vampire story, but it would have been one of the great Blade moments. Where he is an annoyance and a vampire killer kills him. Because he's close enough to being a vampire. He kills people by draining them of blood, and he seems to have no ethical remorse about that stops him from doing it. That's close enough. But neither one of those things happen. Instead, for some weird reason, the powers that be at Marvel, maybe it was Roy Thomas, I don't know, the powers that be at Marvel wanted to make something of Morbius. They wanted to make him a kind of an anti-hero on his own. With tons and tons of Morbius adventures. He's a dumb character. He is garbage. He is the last gasp of comic book garbage. Yet Marvel continues to try to do that. They continue to try. They kept giving him adventures. If you watched Michael K. Vaughan's video today, you saw a gigantic hardcover omnibus of the Morbius adventures. And as if that weren't bad enough, the powers that be at Marvel then decided, well, for Marvel Phase 4 of our movies, we'll make a Morbius movie. It's true that he's never been popular. It's true that he's never managed to sustain a book of his own. It's true that fans don't know who he is. It's true that the fans that do know who he is think the way I do. They think he's dumb. We'll do it anyway. We've got money to burn. Endgame is still making us money. It's up to $2 trillion. We've got money to burn. We'll make a movie of Morbius. And you know, when you look at Morbius in the drawings by Gil Kane and far lesser artists, you see that he's got a long, pale face, and his hair is split down either side of his face. He's got long hair that he doesn't do it in a cross hatch. He doesn't have a sort of a Michael Bolton mane or anything like that. Instead, it hangs on both sides of his face. And who does that remind us of? It reminds us of Jared Leto. What if we get Jared Leto to star as Morbius based only on the fact that he occasionally wears his hair the same way? A purely Marvel Stage 4 decision. The Stage 4 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which I maintain that Eternals and Morbius called a quick halt to it and moved on to Stage 5. Otherwise, we'd still be in Stage 4 if it were doing well. I think that the best way you can characterize Marvel Stage 4 of the Cinematic Universe is a Marvel executive, let's say Kevin Feige, being driven by his illegal immigrant driver to the local gun shop, paying top dollar for the most expensive handgun that they have, impractically expensive, then paying for it in full with your money, pointing it directly at his foot and pulling the trigger. That's Marvel Cinematic Universe Stage 4. It's been one ridiculous audience-hating flop after another, and sure enough, when Morbius eventually got to theaters, fans mocked it and stayed away in droves. It is absolutely horrible. It is an absolutely terrible movie. So Marvel, the current Marvel Cinematic Universe setup, will probably give it many sequels. In Marvel now, in the comics especially, but also in the movie theaters, what fans say they don't like is what you will now do. You will intentionally do that. Seems like a very quick and easy way for a company to put itself into bankruptcy. We shall see. We shall see. Certainly, for ye old folks out there, there was a time in Marvel Comics history when it got a wild bug up its butt and started doing the same thing and quickly went into bankruptcy. There's a certain core audience that likes these things. Not many people do, despite the success of all the Avengers movies. If you intentionally identify what that core audience likes and then intentionally give them the opposite, give them something that's dumb, this thing looks like it was filmed on an iPhone, you'll lose money. I'm not getting in bed with the neck-bearded alt-right quasi-fascist YouTube channels that just chant "Get woke, go broke." But if you attack your audience, if you give them what you know they don't want, over and over again, if you intentionally don't listen to them and scorn what they say, they won't keep buying your product. And if they don't keep buying your product, then you can't afford that car and that illegal alien driver. You can't afford that gun. That's where your money comes from. Anyway, Marvel made a Morbius movie, and it was terrible. Absolutely awful. And although that was unusual for Stage 3 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which had one hit after another almost, with only a few exceptions, it's right in line with Morbius, the comic book character, who should have been dealt with in one of the two ways that I was talking about, where he's basically the Lizard or Mysterio. He's a Spider-Man villain. He shows up once a year, maybe twice a year, maybe once in Marvel Team Up or something like that. It's no big deal. Oh, it's Morbius the Living Vampire. Won't this be tricky? How will Spidey fix this? And then it's done. If you had kept him that way, instead of trying to make him an anti-hero, that would have worked. And if you'd had Blade kill him in a great moment, that would have worked. But no, instead they didn't. Morbius is still around. I'm sure he's still in the Marvel comic book universe somewhere, somehow. I wouldn't know. But that was our epic comic book pick for today. I think the only reason that Michael K. Vaughan didn't hold up the epic collections that that Morbius has been in for Marvel is because he has that big omnibus volume. Even he probably didn't want to buy Morbius twice. Oh my god. So that is it. That is the end of a trash-filled August of Epic Comic Book Wednesday. I don't know ahead of time what Michael will pick. He lets me know just a little while ahead of time. I don't know what he'll pick next time. I am sincerely hoping that to compensate for all of this garbage that we have looked at in comic books for August, that our first Epic Comic Book Wednesday is something really good. That would be really good. We could compensate just a little. Get the taste of Jared Leto out of our mouths. That is your comic book video for today. In this one isolated instance, since we're talking about Morbius, the living vampire, in this one isolated instance, I'm almost glad that the joke that Michael and I always make about how only 2 people watch these videos is true. Because nobody wants to hear 2 videos about Morbius, the living vampire. We'll have to hope for better next time. Thank you, BookTube.